He spent millions training the dog to obey. What he didn't train for was who the dog would protect. They called Brutus uncontrollable. A Rottweiler bred for protection, trained to respond to pressure, commands, and fear. Every handler who came close learned the same lesson quickly. This dog didn't hesitate. So the rules were simple. No eye contact, no proximity, no exceptions, and most of all, no children anywhere near him. That rule had never been broken. Not until the day the maid's daughter wandered onto the private road inside the estate, and the dog reacted in a way no one could explain. What none of them understood yet was that Brutus wasn't responding to bravery, or innocence, or calm. He was responding to something far more dangerous. And by the time the billionaire realized that, the leash had already stopped mattering. Stories like this don't survive on algorithms. They survive on people who care. If this story means something to you, subscribe so stories like this don't disappear. And if you'd like to, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We will love to know. The rules were taped to the kitchen wall, laminated and yellowed at the edges. Yvette had pointed to them on their first morning, her finger hovering over the third line down. Do not approach the dog. Do not feed the dog. Do not speak to the dog. Ainsley had read it twice. Not Mr. Harrington's dog. Not Brutus. Just the dog. Has anyone ever broken that rule? Ainsley asked. Her mother's jaw tightened. We don't ask about the people who aren't here anymore. That was all Yvette said. But Ainsley noticed the way her mother's eyes darted toward the French doors that led to the East Wing, where Declan Harrington kept his office. She noticed how the gardener entered through the side gate now, avoiding the main courtyard entirely. She noticed that the morning delivery driver left packages at the property line instead of the porch. Some power doesn't need to bark to be feared. Brutus wasn't a pet. He was a boundary, a living fence that required no signs. Ainsley had seen him only twice in her first week. Once from the upstairs hallway window, a dark silhouette prowling the hedge line at dawn. Once from the laundry room, a flash of black coat disappearing behind the pool house. Both times, she'd felt the air shift, felt the house hold its breath. But on the 8th day, something changed. She was folding linens in the sunroom when she felt it, the weight of being watched. She turned slowly, and there he was, Brutus, seated 10 feet away, just outside the glass, perfectly still, his eyes locked on hers. Not aggressive, not curious, deliberate. Most people would have looked away. Yvette would have. Ainsley didn't. She held his gaze, her pulse loud in her ears, her hands frozen mid-fold. The Rottweiler didn't growl, didn't move. He just studied her, like he was deciding something, like he was remembering something. And then, as silently as he'd appeared, he turned and walked away. Ainsley exhaled. Her fingers trembled as she set down the towel. Yvette appeared in the doorway, arms full of curtains. You're pale. You all right? Fine, Ainsley lied. But she wasn't fine, because what she'd seen in that dog's eyes wasn't hunger or hostility. What Ainsley noticed wasn't fear, it was recognition, and she had no idea why. It happened on a Thursday, during the narrow window when Declan was in back-to-back calls and Yvette was rotating laundry. Ainsley wasn't supposed to be in the east courtyard, but the irrigation system had flooded the west path, and she'd taken the shortcut without thinking. She was halfway across the stone terrace when she saw him. Brutus stood near the fountain, statue still, his massive head turned directly toward her. She should have retreated. Every instinct her mother had drilled into her said to back away slowly, avoid eye contact, disappear. But Ainsley had never been good at fear. So instead, she stopped walking. And then, without planning to, she took a step forward. Brutus's ears pricked. He rose to all fours, shoulders rolling forward with coiled power. But he didn't bark, didn't snarl. He moved toward her with an eerie slowness, closing the distance until only 5 feet separated them. Ainsley's breath caught. Her hands hung loose at her sides. She didn't crouch, didn't reach out. She just stood there, heart hammering, as the Rottweiler tilted his head and stared, not at her face, at her chest, like he was listening to something beyond sound. Ainsley! Yvette's voice shattered the moment like glass. Her mother sprinted across the courtyard, grabbed Ainsley's arm, and yanked her backward so hard she stumbled. Brutus didn't follow. He sat, calm, unbothered. What were you thinking? Yvette hissed, dragging her toward the side entrance. I didn't. You don't go near him. Ever. Do you understand me? But before Ainsley could answer, a shadow fell across the doorway. Declan Harrington stood in the threshold, arms crossed, his slate-gray eyes cold and sharp. He looked from Yvette to Ainsley, then past them, to Brutus, who still sat exactly where he'd stopped. What happened here? His voice was low, controlled, dangerous. Yvette's grip on Ainsley tightened. Nothing, Mr. Harrington. She took a wrong turn. It won't happen again. Declan's gaze lingered on the dog for a long, unreadable moment. Then he turned back to them. The East Wing is now off limits. Entirely. That includes courtyards, hallways, and balconies. He looked directly at Ainsley. If I see you near my dog again, your mother's employment ends. Am I clear? Yes, sir, Ainsley whispered. He walked away without another word. Authority often mistakes control for understanding. That night, Ainsley lay awake replaying the moment. The way Brutus had approached her. The way he'd stopped without being told. The way his eyes had softened, just for a second, before Yvette screamed. That reaction had happened before, just never with witnesses. And whoever had seen it last was no longer here to talk about it. Declan sat in his office that evening. The trainer's file spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. Brutus had been with him for 3 years. Imported from a specialist facility in Bavaria. Trained in personal protection, perimeter enforcement, and threat neutralization. The documentation was thorough until it wasn't. Pages 14 through 22 were missing. The trainer's notes ended abruptly mid-sentence. Subject displays irregular attachment response when. When what? Declan had called the facility twice. Both times, they'd redirected him to a voicemail that was never returned. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the armrest. Brutus had never disobeyed him. Not once. The dog was a machine, precise, predictable, unfailing. Until 3 days ago, when a 20-year-old girl walked into a courtyard and everything shifted. He believed obedience was loyalty. He was wrong. The next morning, Declan tested it. He stood in the east courtyard with Brutus at heel. Perfect posture. Perfect stillness. He gave the command sharp, clear, absolute. Brutus. Patrol. The dog moved instantly, circling the perimeter in smooth, measured strides. Declan watched, satisfied. Control restored. Then Ainsley appeared. She wasn't close, 50 feet away, barely visible through the hedgerow as she carried folded linens toward the guest wing. She wasn't even looking in their direction. But Brutus stopped mid-stride. His head turned, his body angled toward her. Not aggressive, not distracted, focused. Declan's jaw tightened. Brutus. Heel. Nothing. Brutus. The dog's ears swiveled back toward him, but his eyes stayed locked on Ainsley's silhouette. For 5 long seconds, he didn't move. Then, finally, he obeyed, slowly, reluctantly, like a tide pulled against its current. Declan's pulse kicked up. This wasn't defiance. It was something worse. Hesitation. That afternoon, he called the one trainer who'd answered before, a gruff man named Kershaw who'd done Brutus's intermediate conditioning. Does he respond to commands or patterns? Declan asked. Kershaw paused. Depends what you mean by respond. I mean obedience. Then commands. But if you're asking what he prioritizes, that's different. Some dogs are wired to read environments, not orders. You can tell them to sit, and they will. But if something in the room changes their calculus, the sit doesn't matter anymore. What kind of change? Could be anything. Scent, movement, memory. Another pause. Why? He acting strange. Declan didn't answer. He ended the call. Brutus wasn't reacting to Ainsley. He was reacting around her. And Declan had no idea what that meant. Declan walked Brutus at dawn, when the estate was still wrapped in fog and silence. He planned it deliberately. Yvette had been sent to town for supplies. The groundskeeper didn't start until 8. The private road that curved through the property was empty, bordered by oaks and wrought iron fencing that kept the world at a distance. Just him, just the dog, just control. Brutus moved with military precision. 3 feet to Declan's left, the leather leash barely taut. They rounded the bend near the south gate, and for a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Then Brutus stopped. His entire body went rigid. Ears forward, shoulders locked. The leash snapped tight in Declan's hand. Easy, Declan murmured, scanning the tree line. No movement, no sound, nothing. But Brutus's lips peeled back, a low rumble building in his chest, not a warning, a reaction. And then Declan saw her. Ainsley stepped out from behind the stone pillar at the edge of the road, 50 feet ahead. She wasn't running, wasn't sneaking. She was just there. Morning light caught her hair, her oversized jacket hanging loose, hands shoved in her pockets. She froze when she saw them. Declan's breath stopped. Brutus lunged. 130 pounds of raw force exploded forward, the leash burning through Declan's grip as he braced, boots skidding on gravel. The dog closed the distance in seconds, 20 feet, 10. Ainsley's hands flew up, not in defense, not in surrender, just up, palms out, steady. And Brutus stopped, mid-motion, mid-momentum. His paws hit the ground 3 feet from her, claws scraping stone, his massive chest heaving. But he didn't bark, didn't snap. He just stood there, trembling with restrained energy, staring at her like she'd spoken a language only he understood. Ainsley didn't move, didn't speak. Her hand stayed raised, her eyes locked on his. Declan stood 10 feet behind him, the leash slack in his hand, his pulse roaring in his ears. He hadn't pulled the dog back. He hadn't needed to. Power only works until something refuses to fear it. Slowly, so slowly it felt like the air itself was holding its breath, Brutus sat. Ainsley lowered her hands. Her voice came out quiet, steady. I didn't mean to scare you. Declan didn't know if she was talking to him or the dog. Brutus's tail twitched. Once, twice. Then he looked back at Declan, as if asking permission for something that had already happened. Declan's mind raced. Training didn't account for this. Conditioning didn't explain it. This wasn't submission. This wasn't even trust. This was recognition. The dog obeyed her, but not because she was gentle. Because he remembered something Declan didn't. Declan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study until 3 a.m., nursing scotch he didn't taste, replaying the moment over and over. The lunge, the stop, the impossible stillness between girl and beast. By morning, he'd built a theory that made sense. Some people had it. A presence animals responded to. Calm energy. Low threat. He'd read about it once in a behavioral study. Dogs could sense cortisol levels, heart rate variability. Ainsley must have been naturally non-threatening. A biological anomaly. It was the only explanation that didn't require him to question everything else. So he made his decision. Effective immediately, he told Yvette in the kitchen that afternoon. Ainsley is not to be on the grounds when Brutus is outside. I don't care if it's inconvenient. Arrange your schedules accordingly. Yvette's face went pale. Mr. Harrington, she didn't do anything wrong. I'm aware. His tone was final. This is for her safety. The dog responded unpredictably. I won't risk it again. Well, he didn't say. I won't risk losing control again. That afternoon, Brutus was moved to the West Kennel, A reinforced structure Declan had built 2 years ago and never used. Steel fence, double locks, no windows facing the main house. The dog didn't resist, but when the gate closed, he turned and stared at Declan with something that looked unsettlingly like disappointment. Ainsley found her mother folding sheets in the linen closet that evening, her movements stiff and mechanical. "He's punishing the dog," Ainsley said quietly. "He's protecting you." "From what?" Yvette didn't answer. Ainsley leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Mom, why does he only growl when someone's behind me?" Yvette's hand stilled. The pillowcase slipped from her fingers. "What?" "Brutus. On the road. He didn't react when he saw me. He reacted when I moved toward Mr. Harrington." Ainsley's brow furrowed. "And in the courtyard last week, he was calm until you ran up behind me." Yvette picked up the pillowcase, but her hands were shaking now. "You're imagining things." "I'm not." "Ainsley, has anyone else ever stood between you and that dog?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Yvette turned, her face unreadable, her voice low and sharp. "Drop it. Now." That question almost exposed everything. But Ainsley didn't drop it. She couldn't, because the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that didn't make sense, unless the danger had never been the dog at all. That night, she lay awake, staring at ceiling, replaying every encounter. Every moment Brutus had tensed. Every moment someone had been moving near her. Not at her. Near her. Someone else had been triggering Brutus consistently. And whoever it was, they were still in this house. Declan pulled the security footage at 2 a.m., after the third sleepless night in a row. The system archived 30 days of motion-triggered clips across 12 cameras. He started with the courtyard, then the east wing hallway, then the road. He wasn't looking for proof. He was looking for dismissal. Something to prove his instincts wrong. He found the opposite. Clip 1, April 9th, 6:47 a.m. Brutus in the garden, motionless. Ainsley exits the side door, walks toward the garage. Brutus watches. Doesn't move. Then, someone else enters the frame from the left. The gardener, moving toward Ainsley's path. Brutus's body coils, ears flat. A guttural snarl cuts through the timestamp silence before the clip ends. Clip 2, April 12th, 3:22 p.m. Brutus, near the pool house. Ainsley crosses the terrace, 30 feet away. "Come." Then the housekeeper, older woman, worked here for years, approaches from behind, calling Ainsley's name. Brutus surges forward, barking so violently the camera shakes. Clip 3, April 14th. The road. The moment Declan had lived through. But from this angle, he could see what he'd missed in real time. Brutus hadn't lunged at Ainsley. He'd lunged past her, toward the space where Declan himself had been standing. The leash had pulled him short. And when Ainsley raised her hands, Brutus had repositioned, placed himself between them. Declan's stomach turned. He scrubbed through 20 more clips. The pattern was surgical. Brutus didn't react to Ainsley. He reacted to proximity, to approach, to anyone moving into her orbit when she was unaware. It wasn't aggression. It was interception. Declan closed the laptop. His hands were shaking. Some truths don't accuse. They implicate. If he kept watching, he'd have to name what this looked like. And if he named it, he'd have to act. And if he acted, questions would follow. Questions about why his dog had been trained this way, who trained him, what the original handler had known. Questions Declan couldn't afford to answer. Not publicly. Not now. Because the truth wasn't just about the dog. It was about the woman Brutus had been protecting before Ainsley ever set foot on this estate. A woman whose name was sealed in legal files Declan had spent a fortune to bury. He pushed back from the desk and poured another drink. His jaw clenched. His mind raced through options, each worse than the last. He could rehome Brutus. He could fire Yvette and Ainsley. He could burn the footage and pretend none of this ever registered. But all of those required explanation. Paperwork. Witnesses. Declan realizes intervention would expose more than the dog. So instead, he did what powerful men do when the truth gets inconvenient. He decided to do nothing, and prayed the pattern wouldn't repeat. Declan allowed it, because denying it would have raised more questions. Yvette had asked, quietly, carefully, if Ainsley could help move storage boxes from the east wing. Just once. Supervised. Declan had hesitated for 3 long seconds before nodding. I'll be present, he said, and Brutus stays kennelled. But when they arrived that afternoon, the kennel gate was open. Declan's blood went cold. Who? I let him out. The voice came from behind them. Marcus, the estate manager. Tall, efficient, trusted for 7 years. He said he needed exercise. I thought. You don't think. Declan snapped. You follow instructions. Marcus raised his hands. My mistake. I'll handle it. He moved toward Ainsley, reaching for her elbow to guide her back toward the main house. Brutus appeared like a shadow made solid. No warning, no growl, just instantaneous presence. He cut between Marcus and Ainsley so fast Marcus stumbled backward, his hand jerking away. The dog didn't bare his teeth, didn't lunge. He simply stood there, a living wall, his eyes locked on Marcus with surgical focus. Ainsley froze. Brutus. The dog's ears swiveled toward her voice, but his body didn't shift. He held position, unmovable. Marcus laughed, nervous, performative. Jesus. I'm just trying to help her, not. Step back. Declan's voice was blade sharp. Marcus blinked. What? Step back. Marcus retreated 3 paces. Slowly, deliberately, and only then did Brutus's posture soften. The dog turned, walked to Ainsley's side and sat, not at her feet, beside her, shoulder to her leg, guarding. Declan's chest tightened as the pieces locked into place with sickening clarity. Brutus hadn't been trained to protect Ainsley. He'd been trained to protect someone, and that training had included a secondary directive, one Declan had never seen in the documentation. Identify behavioral threat patterns. Adapt target list autonomously. The dog had been watching, learning, cataloging who moved too close, too fast, too often, who touched without permission, who lingered in doorways, who smiled while cornering. And Marcus, efficient, trusted Marcus, had done all of those things. Not to Declan, to the staff, to the women who came and went quietly, who didn't complain, who didn't last long. The danger was never the animal. Declan's voice came out hollow. Marcus, you're dismissed. Effective immediately. Marcus's face went white. You can't be serious. Because of a dog. Because I said so. Leave. Marcus looked at Ainsley, then at Brutus, then back at Declan. Something cold flickered in his expression before he turned and walked away. Ainsley exhaled slowly. Her hand drifted toward Brutus's head, hovering just above his ears. Can I? Declan nodded. She touched him gently. Brutus leaned into her palm, eyes half closed, the tension finally draining from his massive frame. Yvette appeared in the doorway, breathless. What happened? Declan didn't answer, because the real answer would unravel everything. The lawsuits, the settlements, the women who'd left suddenly, paid off, silenced. The dog had been evidence all along. Justice would cost Declan something permanent. His reputation, his control, his carefully constructed innocence. And he still hadn't decided if he was willing to pay it. The truck came at dawn, unmarked and silent. Declan stood at the window of his study, watching as the handler led Brutus across the gravel drive. The dog moved with the same precision he always had, controlled, unbothered, loyal to the end. He didn't look back at the house. Declan had made the call himself. A private sanctuary upstate, specialized in rehabilitation and rehoming. They'd asked no questions. He'd paid twice the standard fee to ensure they wouldn't. Behavioral inconsistencies, he told them. requires specialized environment. The truth, that Brutus had performed exactly as trained, that he'd adapted and protected, and identified threats with terrifying accuracy, would stay buried with the rest of it. The truck's engine rumbled to life. Brake lights flared red in the fog. Then the vehicle rolled down the long driveway and disappeared through the iron gates. Declan turned away from the window. The house felt heavier now, quieter. Yvette packed their belongings in silence. Ainsley folded clothes mechanically, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind replayed the last 3 weeks. The courtyard, the road, the way Brutus had positioned himself, like a shield she hadn't known she needed. "We didn't do anything wrong," Ainsley said softly. Yvette's jaw tightened. "I know. Then why are we leaving?" Her mother set down a stack of linens and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in days. "Because staying would mean pretending we didn't see what we saw. And I won't ask that of you. Sometimes loyalty protects the innocent and exposes the powerful." They loaded the car in the pale morning light. Declan didn't come out to say goodbye. He'd left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Severance pay, 3 months' worth, and a glowing reference letter that said nothing true. Ainsley paused at the passenger door, looking back at the estate one last time. The windows were dark. The grounds were still. It looked exactly as it had the day they'd arrived, immaculate, imposing, untouchable. But she knew better now. She slid into the seat. Yvette started the engine. They drove through the gates without looking back. Declan stood alone in the empty east wing. The kennel had been dismantled, the security footage wiped. Marcus's severance check had cleared that morning, along with the NDA he'd signed without reading. Everything was contained, clean, controlled. But Declan could still feel it, the weight of what Brutus had known, what the dog had tried to show him, over and over, until there was no pretending left. He'd spent years building walls, hiring loyalty, engineering silence, and the Rottweiler had dismantled it all in 3 weeks. Some power doesn't need to bark to be feared, but some truth doesn't need to speak to be heard. Declan walked to his office, closed the door, and poured a drink he wouldn't finish. Outside, the estate stretched on, rolling hills, manicured hedges, iron gates that kept the world at a distance. Inside, a man sat alone with the one thing money couldn't silence, his conscience. And for the first time in years, Declan Harrington had no idea what to do with it. Sometimes loyalty protects the innocent and exposes the powerful. Justice would cost Declan something permanent. The danger was never the animal, and the girl who dared to stand her ground had walked away free, while the man who owned everything remained trapped in a house that finally felt like what it was, a cage.